At this point in our story, the control people of the 66th and 67th Fighter Wings may be getting a bit browned off because Saffron Walden seems to be taking the credit for everything. They're just not the intention, but it is difficult to write from any but one's own viewpoint. And this is essentially a description of control as the 65th Fighter Wing developed and used it. With Sawston and Walcott Halls, however, as with all the other control centers having anything to do with American strategic aircraft, the chief controller at Saffron had to maintain constant liaison. And in the other control centers, the same responsibility existed. There were two broad categories of information that had to be handled: mission progress data via the various R/T channels and conference lines, and flying control information via OPSB, and the movement liaison position incorporated with it was of key importance in the ops room and will be discussed first. The term OPSB is part of the standard control nomenclature used by both British and Americans, designating a section of 4 chief clerks for the ops room. At first, part of the work at Saffron was segregated into an MLO, Movement Liaison Officer, position, charged with the responsibility of recording and reporting proposed movements of friendly aircraft. It was found practicable eventually to combine all the work into one main OPSB position with communications already described. The fact that the 4 OPSB clerks all sat next to the chief controller on the top dais in the Saffron Ops room indicates how much they were used and relied on. Refer to Appendix C for a detailed description of their duties during a mission. In general, it could be shared. When in doubt, call OPSB. A caller desiring any sort of operational or non-operational flying control information could usually get satisfaction out of these clerks. They were the sort of alert, intelligent, capable people who would get the facts if they didn't have them handy. They were the ones who communicated the controller's routine instructions to the fighter stations. They gave the time checks to all groups before each mission. They assembled the lineups of pilots and aircraft dispatched by each group. They obtained from each group before takeoff all details of planned courses, altitudes, and timings, and passed them to the RAF Center at Stanmore for information of the defenses. They informed flying control officers of other stations about impending emergency landings, whenever it became necessary to divert returning fighters from their home bases. They handled 1,001 other necessary details. OPSB was a liaison workhorse, the voice of Saffron, on all the complicated net of military tie lines that connected the airdromes and control centers in England into a single workable system for the inter-exchange of mission progress data. It has been explained that Saffron was connected on an open conference line with Pine Tree and Nut House, and with the 66th, 67th, and 70th Wings when they were controlling. All these places were also on the same Y service line with Saffron. There had to be complete understanding among all controllers as to just what each was doing, because at any moment a group might have to be shifted from one assignment to another. Further than that, of course, with all B and C channel control centered from the beginning at Saffron, there had to be a flow of information by phone to and from the other wings. Control liaison was also essential with wing combat ops, because often of the last minute and beyond mission details were changed and adjusted. To a certain point, this would be done by Pine Tree and division combat ops by telephone to wing, and thence to groups. As 0 hour approached, however, more and more of this business would shift over onto conference line. The chief controller had to know all about what had been going on previously and had to be familiar with all the changes, and in turn had to keep combat ops informed of further changes. The direct telephone from controller to combat ops was in constant use in the early stages of its mission. By far the most important control agent was with Nut House, MEW in Holland, for reasons already explained. One of the main reasons why American use of the early Type 16 controls at Beachy Head and Hythe was not too successful was that those detachments were run entirely separately, and it was almost impossible for the Saffron controller to get quickly in touch with them or vice versa. The stations were basically RAF setups, and the Americans there reported directly to Headquarters 8 Fighter Command, or to Pine Tree. The telephone and teletype lines were through rather devious channels, and often the Type 16 boys didn't even have the field orders in time for the missions, to say nothing of all the valuable timing information OPSB could provide. The tie-in with RAF No. 11 Group was also extremely important. Practically all the missions crossed out off and into England through the air defense area of 11 Group, and most of the fighter bases were also in that area. There was hardly anything our aircraft could do that didn't vitally interest the 11 Group controller, and the direct line to him from Saffron was kept extremely busy during all the 2 years. The same thing was true to a somewhat lesser extent with RAF No. 12 Group, which covered the area to the north, and particularly with Coltishall and North Weald, amongst the various sector controls of 11 and 12 groups. On any of the numerous occasions when RAF Spitfires were called on to help escort the 8th, or when American fighters helped out the British, this contact was especially close. In the days when damaged bombers habitually straggled back, singly, across all the miles of the Rhineland and Belgium and northern France towards the Straits of Dover, 11 Group was often called upon by Saffron to send Spits or Typhoons to try to meet them and save them from marauding Jerries. Air/Sea Rescue Control had to maintain liaison with 11 Group, 12 Group, and particularly 16 Group, the RAF Agency of Coastal Command, which handled the seaward approaches. After the war moved up into Holland and Belgium, this liaison extended to area of 85 Group at Ghent for the use of rescue launches and Walrus aircraft based on the continent. The telephone contact was through Dover to Ostend Naval Plot. Liaison with the Royal Navy was also a direct responsibility of the Channel B staff, and this extended to bases at Great Yarmouth, Harwich, Dover, Plymouth, Ostend, and elsewhere. A special hotline was constantly opened from Saffron Control to Headquarters RAF Fighter Command at Stanmore for the main purpose of receiving direct orders in case it ever became necessary to use American fighters for the defense of Great Britain itself. Fortunately, the Huns never had enough imagination or whatever else it took to carry out any determined attacks on our bases during 1943 to 45. Although there were many who wondered why they didn't. Certainly the rows on rows of airplanes were good targets, but the RAF and the ACAC boys made it pretty hot for the occasional hit-and-run raiders, and no emergency orders ever came over the Stanmore telephone line. And that's the story.